We will hire American, buy American, build American, grow American, and show the whole world that the American dream is back.
If you look at the geopolitical landscape, I think it's clear that the United States will continue to apply pressure on their ally for more restrictions.
China's warships have moved dangerously close to Australia's coast. At the same time, the US and Russia held high-stakes talks without Ukraine. Behind closed doors, deals are being made and power is shifting. With Trump pushing for a land for peace deal and China seizing opportunities, the global balance is on the brink. Let's dive in. Trump's claim that he alone has the power to end the war in Ukraine has sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. Speaking from Mar-a-Lago, he argued that the war should have never started and suggested that Ukraine could have made a deal before the invasion, giving up a little bit of land in exchange for peace. But what does a little bit mean when dealing with Vladimir Putin? Trump insists that such a deal would have prevented destruction, avoided casualties, and kept Ukraine intact, just minus some territory. Yet Ukraine was not even invited to the recent talks in Saudi Arabia, where US and Russian diplomats sat down for the first time in 3 years to discuss what comes next. This exclusion has fueled European concerns that Trump's vision for peace may come at Ukraine's expense, not Russia's. The diplomatic meeting in Riyadh between the US and Russia was historic, breaking years of isolation imposed on Moscow. Russian officials, including those under US sanctions, sat across the table from American diplomats for hours, discussing what a ceasefire might look like. Ukraine, notably absent, was instead visited separately by an American envoy in Kyiv. But why? Was this an oversight or a deliberate move signaling a change in Washington's approach? The absence of European leaders at the table only deepened concerns, raising fears that key decisions were being made without those most affected. Behind closed doors, discussions likely went beyond Ukraine. European leaders rushed into emergency talks in Paris, alarmed that Washington might be negotiating a deal behind their backs, one that could pressure Ukraine into surrendering territory. Then came Russia's hardline response. Ukraine must never join NATO, and the West must abandon any plans to bring Kyiv into the alliance. This wasn't just a demand, it was a direct challenge. The message sent shockwaves through NATO's eastern flank. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states, already wary of Moscow, saw this as a dangerous sign. If Ukraine was forced into concessions, could they be next? Behind the scenes, diplomats scrambled to make sense of Washington's strategy. Was the US still fully committed to Ukraine's sovereignty, or was this part of a bigger play, one that could shift the entire global balance, bringing Russia and China into a high-stakes negotiation? This presents an unsettling scenario. If the US pushes Ukraine toward territorial concessions, what stops Russia from making further demands down the line? And more importantly, how will NATO react if a US-led deal forces Europe to accept a new status quo? But while all eyes are on Ukraine, something else is happening, something bigger. Speculation is growing that Trump is setting the stage for a broader deal, one that could involve China. Just days after Trump's second term began, he appeared to take a softer tone on Beijing, saying he wanted to get along with China. But within days, tariffs were back on the table. The sudden shift left analysts questioning whether this was a pressure tactic or the opening move in a high-stakes negotiation. If Trump's strategy follows past patterns, economic threats could be a means to extract geopolitical concessions. Could Washington be positioning itself for a grand bargain, one that trades trade relief for security compromises in the Pacific? At first, it seemed like the usual trade war. The US raised tariffs on Chinese goods, and China retaliated with its own tariffs and an investigation into Google. But beneath the surface, this felt different. This wasn't just economic sparring, it looked like the first move in a much bigger negotiation that could shift global power. Trump's past dealings suggest he views tariffs not as punishment, but as leverage. This may be about more than just trade, as some analysts believe Trump could be laying the groundwork for a deal where China agrees to back off certain geopolitical ambitions in exchange for economic incentives. Such a deal would signal a major shift in US foreign policy, prioritizing economic stability over military deterrence. Beijing, facing mounting economic pressures, might see this as an opportunity to ease tensions while strengthening its long-term strategic position. If Washington signals willingness to compromise, China could push for reduced U.S. military support for Taiwan or fewer restrictions on its technological expansion. The question is no longer whether a deal is possible, but rather how much each side is willing to concede to make it happen. But what would China want in return? That's the part that has U.S. allies in Asia on edge. If Washington softens its stance on Taiwan, even slightly, it could change the entire balance of power in the Pacific. Taiwan is already feeling the pressure. Chinese military activity near the island has surged in recent weeks, with 24 aircraft, including fighter jets and drones, crossing the Taiwan Strait for joint combat patrols. This was no routine drill. Beijing was sending a message. The timing of these maneuvers, coinciding with U.S.-Russia negotiations and speculation of a grand bargain, suggests China is testing Washington's resolve. Each incursion forces Taiwan and its allies to respond, stretching military resources and increasing the risk of miscalculation. Meanwhile, China's state media continues to emphasize reunification, reinforcing fears that these aggressive tactics are laying the groundwork for something more. If Beijing believes the U.S. is shifting focus away from the Pacific, it may see this as the perfect moment to push further. If Trump moves ahead with a land for peace deal in Ukraine, it could send shockwaves through NATO. European leaders are already frustrated with the lack of coordination, fearing a deal that forces Kyiv into territorial concessions. NATO's eastern flank, particularly Poland and the Baltic states, is on high alert, worried that any compromise with Russia could embolden Moscow to push further. And in the Pacific, Japan, South Korea, and Australia are watching closely. If Washington strikes a deal with China that benefits U.S. interests but weakens security commitments to its allies, it could lead to a dangerous shift in regional stability. The recent $8 billion military package to Taiwan suggests that Washington is still committed to supporting the island. But if Trump's strategy prioritizes economic deals, could Taiwan find itself in a difficult position? Would the U.S. be willing to reduce military aid in exchange for trade concessions from China? Trump's actions are sending mixed signals. While pushing new tariffs on China, he's also signaling a willingness to negotiate. While holding high-level talks with Russia, he's excluding Ukraine from the process. While affirming support for Taiwan, he's also raising questions about what his ultimate strategy will be. But if allies feel sidelined and adversaries sense weakness, it could lead to a world where geopolitical tensions escalate rather than subside. One thing is clear: decisions made in Washington over the next few months will determine the balance of power in both Europe and the Pacific. Will Trump secure a historic deal, or will this strategy backfire? The world is waiting for the answer. If this deep dive gave you a new perspective, hit that like button, share it with others, and subscribe for more hard-hitting global analysis. Stay tuned. There's always more happening beneath the surface. Thanks for watching.